everybody, and welcome to another episode of Tapas Talkies. I'm Preeti Vikram, your host and the founder of Tapas, a progressive educational institution. I'm really excited to have with us AK, or also AK Srikanth. He is the CEO of Klay Preschool and Daycare. AK is an MBA from Case Western Reserve University and an engineer from BITS Pilani. He has worked with major corporations such as Nestle, the Cleveland Clinic, OCS in India, the Americas, and Africa in a career that has spanned over 2.5 decades. Outside of work, he has a passion for classical arts and has written and directed several award winning classical dance films and shows. That's really exciting, AK, to have a corporate background and also you balance it out with something that you're passionate about. That's fantastic. So I've been looking at how Klay has really blossomed in the last decade or so, having been in the early childhood space for so long, and I'm so fascinated with the journey that you guys have taken. What especially is endearing about Klay is that you guys don't just preach, you really practice it, because in 2019 I believe you were awarded one of the best places to work in India. So not only do you ensure that other parents can leave their children at Klay and be really happy about it, you have ensured that your own staff have a great work life balance. So fantastic, and congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So I think you have taken that, and what I saw is in the last year during the pandemic, you really pivoted and tried to make care for the children as well as learning available for the parents at home in order to ensure that the parents who were stuck at home and working from home had a good work life balance. Can you tell me a little bit about what were the thoughts that went behind it, and how was the whole process?
Um, it was thrust upon us. Actually, when it did happen, I don't think any one of us was expecting anything like this, and certainly not for the duration that it's lasted. In the first time when I heard about a lockdown coming up last March, I had thought that this would probably last a couple of months. By June or July, things should be fine. We're close to the next June or July, and things are still not fine, which is unfortunate. But what we thought was it went through stages. I think what we first started with was let's continue, talking to our children, teaching our children, keeping them engaged. And therefore, we had started off on a session of online, classes for them. And at that time, it wasn't as formally structured as it became later. It was just a way of continuing to engage with the children. Um, you also remember that that was the time when the first academic calendar had ended and we were actually getting into the next academic year. So we had a bit of time there where we could just engage the children. Then it became evident that it was going to be much longer than we thought. So we embarked on two things. One, we were trying to replicate a classroom online, which means not using the usual tools like Zoom or uh, Microsoft Teams. We decided we'll partner with a specific firm from South Korea that does this. And they managed to bring the classroom experience as close as possible on the screen. So we engaged with them, although they were actually far more expensive than any other alternative available with us. Only with the idea that the child should be able to somewhat connect back to the school that he or she had missed out this year. Now, of course, given the age group of children we deal with, not all of them are comfortable with online, whichever way you look at it. So we also started with a program where we could send teachers and caregivers to the homes of parents. Caregivers, because that gave the parents the break to be able to work while the caregiver took care of the child. And teachers, of course, to continue the curriculum for those children that were not engaging well with online. Both of these programs have started off. I think our online program is called Learn at Home, and the teacher or caregiver at home is called Care at Home, spelled with a K, as we always do in Klay. So I think both these programs came out of innovation thanks to the circumstance, thanks to the necessity that made us do it. I mean, 6 months before last March, I would have never imagined we'd be into any of these programs, right? So I'm afraid, I don't think we had a choice. We had to innovate and innovate really fast to be able to not just keep the children engaged, but also to survive ourselves as a system. because our revenues were from schools and schools stopped.
Right.
So we were facing an existence crisis at one point in time. So there was no choice. It was either do or die.
Right.
I think the team stood together really well to deliver what they did. And it's a learning curve. I think we're also learning as things go along. We're innovating more now, a little more bravely than we did back then. But I think that's now become a part of my psyche that this kind of innovation has to be a lifelong thing, because I don't know what is normal after this, or whether we would ever see the normal as we used to know it. I mean, these are questions that none of us have answers for, unfortunately.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more that this is the new normal. And there are talks that it could result in maybe half of this academic year also being online. So,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
waiting to see how that pans out. But I
Hmm.
do believe
Hmm.
that we are at the threshold of change, considering that 2019 and 2020, we saw the national education policy coming into effect. And now parents have seen that education can look different. And so I believe that the parenting community is also open for different forms of education. I feel that it's easier with the early childhood care and education for bringing about a change in the way we are doing things and having it more experiential. But my question is, do you believe going forward, that is from primary grades right up to secondary, change is going to be easy in terms of embracing the national education policy? Do you believe we are ready for that?
Change is never easy. Change is always difficult. Inertia is a difficult habit to break. It takes time to get accustomed to it. I think, would we progress in the way the national education policy has envisaged it? I certainly hope we would. I think what is needed is a lot of more nuts and bolts to the national education policy. I think on document, on a vision statement, on a strategy level, it's a fabulous education policy. What I also see is many a time the implementation of it turns out to be very different from the way it was strategized. So I think a lot depends on how the government helps us implement it given our current situation. And I don't mean the COVID, I mean, given our current state of the education system, given where we want to take the education system, there is a lot of lacunae that needs to be filled up both by the schooling community, the parents, and the government.
Right.
And right now, what we have is a very overarching statement. I think it couldn't get elaborated on quicker only because we went into the COVID after that, and things went haywire.
Right.
But I think there is some work to be done before that plan is implemented on the ground. And if it's implemented correctly, I think we can move towards the ideals that were set out behind it. If I would think that whether we achieve what it promises or not would depend upon how it actually flows into the system when we actually get around to implementing it. And that has several question marks around it and several things that need to be ironed out, several things that need to be addressed. It's not something that's going to be, just take it from the paper and roll it out. I think it's going to be a little more complicated than that. But the vision it sets is laudable indeed. I think I, for one, was very impressed with the document that came out at that time. And I'm certainly hoping it gets rolled out exactly as it was envisaged.
Right.
Certainly, yeah.
Right. I think at Tapas, our endeavor is also to try and see that whatever has been envisioned in the vision document of the national education policy is followed as close to it as possible, that we are aligned to it
Sure.
as much as possible. And so at Tapas, you'll be happy to know that it is completely experiential learning. So you can imagine it as a flipped classroom. So children are researching in the library, they're going to be reading up at home about certain things. Then they come to the classroom to actually implement it through the projects and through the discussions and debates that we are going to have. So I'm excited to
Fantastic.
see how we are able to align. And so probably I'll let you
Yeah.
know about how that goes a little later. Um, so let's talk about how education looks and how it has looked for you when you were studying, when you were in the school education system. Do you believe that there has been change since then to now? And do you believe that there should be a change, and why should it change?
course, there's been a change, and I think it's changed to become far more holistic than it used to be. When I was going to school, and this was in the 80s, they did exist. For young people, don't think that anything existed before 2000. The 80s did exist, and we did go to school cycling oneself. It was a different experience. I think those days, a school was seen as a stepping stone to scoring something in your 12th grade and those entrance exams that can either make you an engineer or a doctor, or if you're a commerce student, you get into becoming a chartered accountant. Um, that was the limit of what I knew as a school kid. I knew that one of these three had to happen. Now, I was not a commerce student and I was not into biology. So, in my case, there was only one thing that had to happen, that was I should get engineering. And if that didn't happen, then I think the way it was portrayed to me back then was that if you're not an engineer and you've already given up doctoring and chartered accountancy, then there's nothing much you can do with your life other than being a clerk or a cycle repair shop or something. So, and I believed that, honestly. I used to think that was it. And I used to sit and wonder that if I don't crack any of these engineering exams, what am I going to do with my life? Right. I think that has changed completely. I am sure that many parents, such as myself, who went through the ludicrousness of that system, have decided that they will have no such expectations of their children. And that has changed. Of course, the system itself has thrown up many alternative paths for the children to achieve themselves. And it doesn't have to be an engineer. Engineer is just one possible path. And it's not even the path for all of us. As in, there are some children who are inclined to be engineers, and by all means, they'll make very good engineers. But to think that engineering is only the only thing that you could do to earn a living is kind of stupid. I'm not saying my parents were being stupid. I'm just saying the system did not know any better back then. We come from, at least I came from, a very typical middle class background, and an education was a sure means of making a living, making a sustained, consistent living. And I think that was foremost on my parents' mind, that this kid should somehow get a good, stable job and he should be able to fend for himself. And that was, I think, very important in the times they grew up in, because unemployment was higher, opportunities were lower, entrepreneurship hardly existed, right? So, to that extent, I think education has completely changed. I think the children who are in education today are far smarter. They have far many more choices. And they definitely are able to become far more visionary about things than I ever was when I went into college or when I left my school. So I think the children who are growing up today are definitely much more well informed. But what's also happened, I guess, is that things have become that much more competitive. And therefore, I think that pressure, which I used to feel as a 12th grader, has still not gone away. It's probably worsened.
Probably.
Um, and paradoxically, with many more avenues opening up, the children still having pressure on their head would mean that we, as school administrators, are not doing something right. Because children are not supposed to be pressured. They're supposed to make free choice.
Yes.
And I think the new education policy, if nothing else, will have to address that part.
You're right. So well put. I think you're right in terms of, yes, education has changed, but then I think we have miles to go before we can rest, because
Uh,
you rightly pointed out, there is still a lot of stress on students. I think more because probably we are a reactive education system. We look at, okay, so these are the new avenues of employment that have come in, so maybe we can create courses. So we are working backwards. So we're not
yep,
helping students to be adaptive. So
yep,
I see that as being one of the big concerns that a lot of
mm,
us in the education space are today feeling,
yep,
right?
yep,
Right,
mm,
absolutely. So the biggest challenge I feel in implementing any change to the education system comes from the way we assess, especially our criterias of assessment. It's all based on how much I can remember during my final exams. There is no system that kind of helps us gauge what the child has learned. I'd like to
yep.
hear your views on how you have felt about the report cards that your children have brought home. Do you think it made a difference? I mean, does that score on that report card at the end of the year make a difference? And If
Not
not,
to me at all. No. Um, it did not make a difference to me whatsoever what the report card was. Um, I think, but to my parents, when I was growing up, that was the be all and end all of life.
right,
A report card signing was a very solemn event, something like lighting an Olympic flag or something, Olympic torch. It used to be an evening which I would dread because there used to be such analysis and psychoanalysis of what went behind that report card. You'd think that that is, sort of your life's history being read out to you. I definitely don't think report cards matter to me in that sense. What I'm looking for actually now is to see which is the direction that seems to interest this child, right? And to that extent, I wish report cards were even more holistic than they are even today. I would like to know if my child is inclined to music, if my child is inclined to dance, arts, something else. What I'm seeing is she inclined to chemistry or physics or biology or commerce? There's more to life than these.
absolutely.
And I still don't see that. I don't see if my son could be a good javelin thrower.
Mhm.
Um, those kinds of aspects are still not a part of the report card. I think that is, I needed a more holistic view of what my child is gravitating towards
Right,
without me having to, or the system having to push him towards anything.
right.
And then we can look at, okay, this interests the child. Let's see where we can develop his or her skills on that. Right? And it could be anything. It could be physics. It could be javelin throwing. It could be anything.
Right.
Uh, but I think there's still some ways to go before that kind of assessment is done. And I hate to use the word assessment because it seems to set some benchmarks and measure a child up to those benchmarks, which I'm completely in disagreement. I think each child sets his or her own benchmarks naturally.
Right.
Um, every year in the Olympics and the Asian Games and music and arts and dance and whatever you look at it, there's some new record being created. These are being created by people who didn't have the record yesterday. So why are we setting up these benchmarkings when they're going to be broken by these very people we are benchmarking them against? So let them free, see where it goes.
Absolutely.
You have a life full of drudgery anyways, so those are the years you should not take away from the child.
Yes, I agree. I completely agree with you that the assessment is more to do with maybe the teacher, right? I mean, how good was the
Yeah,
lesson in
yeah,
the classroom?
yeah.
That
I
would be,
think that's true. Yeah, that would make more sense to me.
yeah,
How well is she, honing the child's innate abilities? How well she's not, again, the teachers or assessed on have they completed their curriculum on time? Did they stick to the lesson plan? I mean, again, even the teacher, you're not giving her too much scope to innovate.
absolutely.
uh, if she does find a gifted child, where is the innovation in the system where she can, step off the beaten track and take a different route? There's very little scope for change in her own teaching methodologies also. So I think even her assessments need to be different.
Right. You're right. And
Yeah.
so I've heard quite a few things in this one particular answer. You summed up so many things. So I'd like to break it down a bit. One thing that you touched upon is understanding if the child is gravitating towards the arts or sports or something that's not the actual academics itself. So I think schools are looking at it as extracurriculars and something outside of the report card right now. So it's not given the same importance or the same kind of space in a child's life, time in a child's life. So you're right. We have to look at it being part of the curricular, the part of the pedagogy itself. The second thing I really liked what you said is about the report cards. It doesn't matter to us parents today, and I think companies, many companies across the world, and this is something that Google has already said, they don't care about the actual marks of the student. It's about the aptitude and not the actual report card. So what are we really having these report cards for? So why you're perfectly right in saying that what are these benchmarks and who's created these benchmarks? Each year, I think in the newspaper, when you look at the 10th grade results or the 12th grade results, they're all at 98, 99, 99.8. I mean, so what are we really measuring here? So it makes me wonder. And so at Tapas, I think we have very carefully made sure that the way we understand the child's development is through
Mm.
the curriculum itself. For example, if in first grade I need to understand if this child is able to add and subtract and can do this kind of math on fingers, on their fingertips and in their mind, we have a role play of how children will go to a shop, buy something, and bring the right change back. And so the teacher
Sure.
automatically knows how much it is. So this is the kind of understanding the teacher should have. And I'm trying very hard not to use the word assessment here, so we've built that into what we do at Tapas. So I'm very keen to have you someday visit Tapas and walk you around and
Absolutely.
try to
In
do.
fact, been on the cards for quite some time, but for this pandemic, I would have been there long back, without a doubt.
Fantastic. So we will look forward to having you. But that leads me to the next question I wanted to ask you in terms of, um, so you've done your master's in business administration, and then you've done your before that you've done your engineering at BITS Pilani, and you've also had your hands in art forms, different art forms. So I wanted to ask you, which of these has really enriched what you do today? Has this contributed to who you are and the role that you are presently holding?
Um, I think I live a schizophrenic existence. I am somebody at work. I'm somebody else off work, and sometimes, yes, the two do mix a little bit, um, but not as often as one thinks. I keep the two lives very distinct, very black and white. So, what gives me more pleasure is not the question. It's a matter of how well I'm able to balance these two facets, is what I keep wondering. And it varies, right? If I'm on a project and creating a short film, I mean, that takes up more time. If I'm at work and there's some projects there which start extending hours for me, then the projects at home take the back seat. And that's been going on for quite a while. As in, it's this life has been led by me for almost the last 15 years now. But yes, obviously my professional life I do because of many things, but also because of money. My personal life, where I'm in the arts, is something I do as an outlet for my creativity, which would never see an outlet in the corporate life. Not this kind of creativity, right? To some extent, maybe in the advertising or marketing areas, but really not what I can do in that field. So I think they satisfy different parts of my brain, which is how I like to look at it. And each one to his own. I think uh, it's been an interesting journey, but I suspect my life in arts will continue well beyond my retirement. Um, so to that degree, I think that is probably going to last me my lifetime, while my corporate work will probably not last me beyond another 10 years.
That's very interesting, no? And it's a great viewpoint to have, uh, two sets of different things that you do and how you're able to manage the black and white. I'd really like to learn from you someday. But I do believe that some amount of creativity would have overflown into your professional life, and some amount of professional experience would have overflown into your creative life also. So obviously, those are some.
There is that osmosis. Yeah, there is that osmosis. You do bring in some. So when I'm shooting for a dance film, the way you control a project from bloating up because of the egos or because of unprofessionalism that you see in the cast can inflate costs tremendously. There,
Right,
my corporate self comes, "No, this is how it's going to be run. And if you're not here on time, you're out of the project,
right.
right?" So that part comes from my corporate life very strongly. In fact, art guys tell me that he runs it like a CEO
Mhm.
would, right? But when I come back to this part of my life, I think arts is what has connected me with my teams most strongly. Actually, the team at Klay knows this life I live, and they are very interested in that part. They see their CEO as a human face.
Right.
It helps me connect, especially in a system like Klay, where 95% are women, and they tend to be very much more interested in the arts than men now. It's a rarity to find men in the corporate world who go beyond hip hop or disco.
Right.
Um, but I think women tend to be far, far more artistically inclined. And therefore, some of the discussions they have with me, and I start wondering, wow, are you a corporate person or are you an art? And they say, we think the same about you too. So I guess there's more to the breed than I thought.
Right.
So yeah, it does seep through both ways, without a doubt.
So I also read that you're a big proponent of understanding how dads at work, that's a big uh, you know, pet peeve for you, that there is maternity leave, but there is no paternity leave. And dads at work are not being taken as seriously as moms at work. So you like to say
See, that
something?
is my peeve. It's not so much the leave. It's so not just this aspect. I think I am a huge proponent for the causes of women because my current trilogy, which I'm directing as a director in my other life, is actually about women,
Okay.
juxtaposed with the colors of the Indian flag and how those colors represented an ideal. And I'm trying to see if women are able to live up to those ideals that were done by our founding fathers. So actually, I'm a big proponent of that also. So when it comes to parenting, it's not a question of paternal leave or maternal. It took two of us to create that child.
Right.
So then you can't differentiate saying that this is her job and this is my job. No, this is our job and this is our baby. It's not like I'm going to take his right brain to work with me and you're going to keep his left brain in the kitchen or something like that.
Right.
The child is ours. The child has to be grown up as a combined unit. That's a mom and a dad.
Right.
So what is true for one? So these separations of, this is maternal leave, but not paternal leave.
Right.
Um, it strikes me as rather fall. Now, I completely understand that the physical dimension of the woman having given birth to the baby needs time to recover. But that's just one part of the story. I think there's a lot more to do with how the child is to be brought up, and that's a joint. So,
Right.
in my opinion, if it took two to create the child, then everything should be given to the two. It can't be singled out to one.
Right.
That's where my pet peeve is. So things like paternity leave or maternity leave are probably a symptom of the problem.
Okay.
I think the fundamental problem is far deeper, and the deep problem is that there is a certain box in which men are put in. There's a certain box in which women are put in. That this is what. And while we progressed beyond my mother's age to now, some things don't change. They become more subtle, but they don't change,
Mm.
and that irks me no end. So I would rather that it was on your face like it was in my grandmother's time than subtly suggest something and do something else. This smacks of hypocrisy. At least they weren't hypocrites then. They were downright clear about what they thought.
True.
Right. So, in my opinion, I think the battle is long. The battle for the oneness or the rights of the child is something that has to be fought, nevertheless.
Okay.
And and the best beneficiary in this is the child.
Absolutely.
If the child is able to get both parents to contribute, there's nothing like that. That is, you're raising the ideal child.
Absolutely.
So if the system doesn't allow me to do that, obviously I'm peeved.
I think you've made a difference from where you have come. And as a parent yourself, I'm sure the ideals that you believe in are the ideals that your children have been raised. So that actually brings me to my next question, that as a father, what are the three things that you followed in your life that have really contributed to having this beautiful journey of being a father?
um, Three things I've contributed to as the first thing that I tell my children from a very early age is that you can do everything and everything has a consequence. You have to choose on what you want to do based on the consequence.
Okay.
All right. So they are very strongly brought up with the effect of some things have this, some things have this as a result. And if that consequence is okay to me, or if the consequence is what I seek, then this is what I should be doing. Right? So that is a system I believe in very thoroughly, and therefore, everything in life can be managed with that equation. If you want to give an 18 or 20 hours of day in work and neglect your wife and your children, the consequence is that you'll make a lot of money, but you won't have anywhere to spend it on. But if you're okay with that consequence, please go and do it.
Right.
Right? So that's the way I thought about it. And this is probably the first and most important thing that I've tried to teach my children. I've told my children that you dogmatism has to be left out as far as possible, because you are a certain way and someone else is a certain way. You can't judge them for it. You can't pass your value judgments on it.
Absolutely.
The third point is a aftermath of this. You will not let yourself be judged for who you are. You are who you are, and you love that. If others don't like it, you will not accept that. You will not step down. I think they're all interconnected in its own ways. I'm a big proponent also of personal choice. And I think to me, these are the only things. Otherwise, you make your life a jail and you live in it all your life. So if you want to live free, then you can't be opinionated. You cannot also take opinions of others to affect your life. You do what you have to do.
Brilliant. I think
Um,
the three things that you've said are just brilliant. I'm just going to, sum that up. First thing is that you give children choices, but they have to make an informed choice, informed of what the consequence can be. And I think
yeah,
that actually defines everything else, right? So if you
yeah,
made an informed choice, you're obviously going to be responsible for it. It wasn't that somebody
yes,
misled you, right?
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
in terms of the
Yeah,
judge,
rather than saying right choice or wrong choice, I think it's the informed choice, as you said, is the best word to use. It didn't occur to me. It's not a right or wrong choice. It's the choice you made.
yeah, absolutely.
That's all.
Right. And about the judgment part, I think if the children are brought up not to judge anybody and not allow anybody else to judge them, the whole peer pressure is gone. I mean, we don't have to worry about the peer pressure and then ever having to please people. I think we have a lot of people pleasers amongst us who unfortunately make the wrong judgments and wrong decisions because they want to please. And so,
Yeah, yeah. And I think that comes from us as parents because we expect children to behave in a certain way. They get punished if they don't. So they're forever trying to seek to please. And we put it in their heads that to please someone is the right thing to do. We start.
right,
Had they stood up to us and said, this doesn't make sense to me, we shouldn't have got offended. We should have sat him down and said, okay, tell me, why doesn't it make sense to you? And maybe you change your mind about it, my mind about it, right? Had we dealt with it in that fashion, things would have been different.
right, right.
Uh, so, especially in our culture in India, I think talking back to adults is considered to be very disrespectful. But not all talking back is disrespectful.
Right.
Talking back is different from being disrespectful. I think the two are different things.
Yes. In fact, that's one of the things that in J. Krishnamurti's teachings, and he mentions that question everything, and don't blindly follow that. Right. So you see that these children have been grounded in asking questions in the right way, and I think
Correct.
sometimes that is misconstrued to be answering back, or when you question, it seems like you're disrespectful. But I think it's very
Yeah.
different. At Tapas, one of the things that we are teaching, I'm sorry, I have to bring in Tapas, so one of the things that we do is to have children debate. And there are 5 levels of debating that children go through, from being just argumentative right up to defending your thought processes and how you think, right? So there are 5 levels of debating that children go through. And it ties in beautifully to what you've said, that if they are equipped with the tools to make a statement without hurting or putting the other person on the defensive, I think that will take them a really long way. And being also able to understand the other person's perspective and be non-judgmental about it, also I think is going to go a long way in
Yeah. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. Of
what you've said is what we are following. I really like that the thoughts are so aligned.
course. Excellent. No, that's really good that you're making sure that these values are held in a school, right?
Right.
Rather than just being an academic place where you learn your subjects and come back. A child's upbringing is a lot more than the textbooks she carries. Um,
And I think
there's a
the
lot more
Byju's
that,
of the world are there for that, right? So if the child needs academics, there's Google, there's Byju's, there's XYZ, hundreds of things that's going on. What they come to school
yeah,
is really to learn the values and
it's different.
be
It's for a
adaptable.
different reason. Yeah, yeah, couldn't agree more.
Fantastic. So, one last question. I know that we are still in the middle of the pandemic. I don't believe that we are anywhere close to the end. What would be
Mhm.
your tips for parents during the pandemic? Maybe a couple of tips on how parents can handle the whole situation at home.
So actually, I'm I'm as lost as most parents are in this, but I'll give my 6 cents.
Sure.
And it's not that I profess to be any expert of how to parent children in the pandemic. I'm going through this the first time, as all of us are. But
Sure.
I think a lot of this would have to come from a lot more patience. Children are put in a circumstance where they don't understand what is going on. They still don't understand what is going on. But they are children. We are adults. We'll have to deal with it more patiently than they do.
Right.
I think we also have to keep that sense of dread outside the house. I think it gets accentuated by all the news we read, all the TV that's being shown. Everything seems to have nothing but bad news these days. And I think while not turning ostrich and refusing to see the problem, I think it's good to have a conversation that, listen, we are in a bit of a spot right now, but nothing of the sort ever stays forever. And we are together and we count our blessings and we move on. I think letting the child know that things are going to be fine is very important. I'm seeing a lot of children getting into a state of deep uncertainty and they're mirroring what their parents are thinking. I think all of us are going through very stressful times.
Yeah.
I think in front of the children, we'll have to, I'm not saying lie to them, but I'm saying be more positive with them. They don't understand negativity. And if they do, you'll put them into a depression. I think keeping the positivity at home is important. Maybe watch a movie on Sundays together. Maybe, devise some indoor games where the whole family participates and, do silly stuff, uh, do really silly stuff. I remember there's a young crowd here in my house because they all are learning dance. And we get into these moods where we make up songs which really have no meaning at all. But the idea is who can do the stupidest one. And somehow these things keep us merry at the moment, right? It's otherwise, what do? You read the paper, you're learning how many cases today, how many died for lack of oxygen. And there's so much helplessness that comes about that we're not able to do anything about any of this, right?
Right.
But you got to stay alive through this. Otherwise, what is there? So I think spreading a little more positivity will help. It's easier said than done. I know I struggle with this as much as anybody else does, but I think there's what choice do we have?
True. You can choose to be upset or you can choose to be happy. So I think that's the choice that.
Yeah, but I do strongly believe that this too shall pass. I do believe that the pandemic will become a memory at some point. And that's the belief that keeps me going. I strongly believe that. I really do think that this will be a thing of the past. And one day we'll all sit and say that, man, those days were something else. You know?
Yes, we'll have a lot of stories
That's
about this day.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You're right.
So yeah,
So we look forward to seeing your work, especially my interest is picked about the one with the Tiranga and juxtaposing that.
ah,
I'm looking forward to seeing that.
actually releasing this Friday,
Okay,
the second part. The first part is already out. So please do watch it.
for that, and definitely I'll catch that. Thank you so much
Sure.
for spending your time talking about different things. I'm sure uh,
Yeah.
there has been different kinds of questions that have come that have been thrown at you, and I think you've given us some wonderful answers. We are really thankful for your time and spending so much again time with us. So it's been a pleasure having you on Tapas Talkies, and we look forward to your visit to Tapas sometime soon.
Absolutely. I look forward to it also. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy. Look forward to seeing you very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care and have a great
Bye.
day.
You too. Bye.